Just briefly with me, like I said, I teach science and math to 12, 13, 14-year-old students. I teach game design to adults. I make games, and I do this because I am an idealist. I really want to make the world a better place. I like solving puzzles, so I got a bachelor's degree in physics. I worked for JPL for a bit. I loved solving those puzzles, but I got tired of being indoors. I actually worked in a lab with the lights out, and that was a little bit much for me. So I went and I got a master's in ecology, so I could do science that was outside, and I worked for the National Park Service for a while. And it was super interesting, and I think we learned really valuable stuff, and a lot of that stuff did not get used because there's this gap between science and society that I find disappointing. So what I did is I thought, well, I know games because I'm a lifelong gamer, and I know science, and I can put these together in a way that I think is better than the average person because I have both of these sides. And so I left my job to do the thing that I thought ought to be done, which is to make sciencey games that were like actually engaging and interesting and required critical thought to try and both communicate science concepts, but also to communicate the meta message that learning is valuable, that science is valuable, that probably you're doing science even when you're not thinking about it. Like science isn't block A hits block B and it moves. Science is understanding the world, it's life. So I'm trying to be an advocate for that to help the world be a better place. Which is very much the critical game study. It's making games that are fun and just trying to put the right thing in the and. So that's me. And so I started my little design studio that's just me. I called it Mindful Mammoth because you got the alliteration, because mammoths are cute, and because mindfulness is definitely the thing I'm trying to advocate. You look at the rainbow and you see what it looks like with your eyeballs, and you see the physics behind it with your brain, and you think, not, oh gosh, I'm sad about the physics, but you think, wow, that's actually really cool that the world makes rainbows. And so that the science enriches your experience. And so as you become more mindful, you hopefully become a person who's better able to make good choices, but also a happier person too. So that's me. And then very briefly, I'd be curious, what brought you here to this room specifically, this critical game studies? Like what were you curious about? We just do a short loop and tell me your thoughts.
Well, I'm the librarian at the school where I work, and this is something that I really want to emphasize, and if I learn it and talk about it to the teachers, maybe they can implement some of that. But it's also a lot of preaching and trying to convince them and saying I'm not adding more to your plate, I'm just enhancing your plate with the extra calories. This is a way to have students engage in the classroom.
Cool, thanks.
I'm Handley. I teach here at Arte, and I'm interested, I teach philosophy, so sometimes it's right for gamification, but at the same time it's difficult. And I've actually had my kids make games already, which was really fun, but I want to make a better game, and I like the idea of how games communicate, and I want to help them make their games better also, and so that's why I'm here.
My name's Melody. I'm a parent of 4 children whom I've homeschooled over about 5 years. All of them are in school now, so I run a homeschool culture, and I use games a lot. I have some game ideas, and I'm just passionate about games and learning, so that's what got me here and here.
Super, thanks.
Hi, I'm Sonia. I also teach here at Arte, and I'm just interested in learning more about creating games to help my students with critical thinking. So that's what brought me here.
Cool.
I'm Allison. I'm a librarian also. And yeah, I'm really similar things. Close reading, critical thinking is all stuff I'm already doing with my students. I teach in elementary school, and so interested in finding unique ways to do it.
I'm Tracy. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a chemistry and global studies teacher, and I'm here. I met Tim before, and he was a guest on Game Level Learn when I wasn't on. But from listening to that episode, I know that Tim thinks about games at a level above where I think about games, and about games as a form of communication. Which I think as a science teacher I'm not great at, so I'm just here to get all the wisdoms.
High expectations. I will do my best. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Grace. Grace. I was previously a high school teacher. Right now I'm not teaching, but I did teach ESL and art. Tried gamifying my classroom a bit with my husband, who's a speaker here as well, and just want to learn more, honestly, about this. Exciting. And I might be taking a couple pictures, so.
All right, thanks. Okay, so sounds like we're all here for the right reasons. We all have these shared interests in games and education and making the world a better place, which is everything I expected, which is why I'm happy to be here. Thanks. So once upon a time, I did this thing, Critical Game Studies, the class. I was teaching game design at the Los Angeles Film School in LA. It's a little bit northeast of here. And so when I taught this class, there was kind of a two-way street that I had in mind, is I wanted my students to be better listeners, to be able to look at a game and see the text, yes, but also the subtext, like what is this game saying? And I wanted them to be better speakers too, because they were all aspiring game designers. And so if you're going to be a game designer, you should know what your game is saying. You know, your own, yes, often unacknowledged prejudices and assumptions about the world are going to come through, maybe more, maybe less. And the more that you are aware of those, the better your game will be, and the more effective your game will be at advocating the things you actually believe in. So it was an interesting class, and so as I share these things with you, I wanted to share this with you for the same reason, to I hope help you to be better listeners to what games are saying and better speakers in your own game design, curriculum design process. Also, I think this is super interesting, and I think it is worth teaching people critical game studies as a thing, like for students. And so then there's the meta thing, is hopefully, you know, I can help you learn from my experience, my successes and my failures. Like if you wish to teach other people how to listen and how to speak with games, that this will help you do that too. So I'm not currently teaching this to adults, but I've actually pitched this to my middle school principal, and I've proposed an elective class called Brainwashing for Beginners. That is basically the same curriculum, because all of these topics can really be talked about at any level. You can show somebody a game and ask them challenging questions, and then they can address it at whatever level is appropriate to them. And then in the game design process, you can become a little bit more aware of it. So like this really works for everybody. You just sort of change the level of discussion a little bit to fit whatever their level is. So I want to sort of start out with my thesis about what's going on, what I think critical studies is, some examples, rhetoric, which I think is a cool word. All right, we don't need to talk about it. That's fine. Practicum, I think I would ask you to think about games some, and then we can reflect on this whole thing, try and get something out of it. It's lots of things I wanted to talk about, so maybe I'll talk fast, or maybe I'll skip some slides. We'll see. So in my mind, critical studies is basically two questions. Is you look at a thing, and you say, what does this mean, and what does it matter? And so you look at a game, and you're like, it's fun. Okay, great. And what else does it mean? And you can talk about the people who made it, the games industry, which is semi-notorious for not treating white males very well. Also getting a bad rep for crunch time, where people work really hard until you get sort of like a little bit beyond burnout. You start to have health effects and people leave the industry. But that's not everywhere. There's lots of game studios that do good stuff too. So it means that. It also means, you know, what is the game saying about the world, and how does that impact you beyond fun? Which kind of leads to this thesis bit. That's actually the biggest challenge when I was teaching critical game studies. So I want to take a minute to share some ideas. Okay, here's a thesis. Games can do good. Agree?
Yes.
Disagree? All right, I was hoping that we could, you know, through a claim sort of, pass this idea, and I think we can, which is great. Then I'm going to progress to some more complicated and more difficult things. How about games can do harm? Agree? Disagree? Okay. When I was teaching this to my college-age adult humans, the vast majority of people disagreed with this, and we actually got stuck on step one. And I think this was, in many ways, an identity issue, because they are game designers. And to say that games can do harm is like me telling my students, hey, you can do harm. And they were resistant to that. No, we're doing this for good reasons. It's also that I think games get a lot of unwarranted bad press. There's this stereotype of the gamer who lives in somebody's basement and just eats popcorn all the time and doesn't really engage with the world. And that's you know, it's much more than that. And so people who are gamers are very defensive often. And so saying the